The gardens of New Haven Colony smelled like earth and growing things. Jack Hayes knelt between rows of tomato plants, his hands covered in dirt as he carefully tied vines to their supports. The twin suns of the outer rim world cast long shadows across the greenhouse, and Jack worked with the peaceful rhythm of someone who had found exactly where he belonged. He did not notice the royal transport landing at the edge of the settlement until his neighbor came running to tell him. The Queen of Viridia herself was visiting their small farming colony, and everyone was supposed to gather at the community center to greet her. Jack wiped his hands on his work pants and considered staying in his greenhouse. He had left behind a life of ceremonies and formalities. That was the whole point of coming here. But his neighbor insisted, so Jack walked slowly to where the colonists had gathered. He stood at the back of the crowd, planning to slip away as soon as the speeches ended. Then he saw her. Queen Lysera was not what he expected. The pictures he had seen showed a regal figure in elaborate robes surrounded by guards and advisors. The woman who stepped out of the transport wore a simple traveling dress, and her violet skin seemed to glow softly in the sunlight. Her eyes, like polished purple stones, looked tired. She smiled at the nervous colonists with genuine warmth, not the political smile Jack had seen on so many leaders. The colony administrator gave a boring speech about their farming achievements. Queen Lysera listened politely, but Jack noticed her gaze drifting to the fields of golden wheat that surrounded the settlement. She looked at the growing crops the way he did, with appreciation for the life they represented. When the speeches finally ended and the colonists lined up to formally greet her, Jack turned to leave. "You're not staying?" a voice asked behind him. Jack turned to find Queen Lysera standing there, having somehow slipped away from her handlers. Up close she was even more striking, but what caught his attention was the curiosity in her eyes. She was looking at him like a person, not a subject to manage. "I've got plants that need watering, Your Majesty," Jack said simply. He gave a small nod of respect and started walking toward his greenhouse. To his surprise, she followed him. "May I see your gardens?" "The administrator mentioned you grow old earth varieties. I've always been fascinated by earth plants." Jack could not think of a polite way to refuse a queen, so he led her to his greenhouse. Inside, rows of vegetables grew in careful order. Tomatoes, peppers, beans, herbs, even a few strawberry plants that were just starting to flower. Lysera moved between the rows with obvious delight, asking questions about growing seasons and soil composition. She knew more about agriculture than Jack expected. "These are beautiful," she said, touching a tomato plant gently. "Do you sell them?" "Some," Jack replied. "Mostly I just like growing them." "There's something peaceful about it. You plant a seed, give it water and light, and it becomes food. Simple, honest work." Lysera smiled, a real smile this time. "That sounds wonderful. My work is never simple or honest. It's all politics and compromises and trying to make everyone happy while knowing that's impossible." They talked for over an hour. Jack showed her his composting system and explained his irrigation setup. Lysera asked intelligent questions and listened to his answers like they mattered. She did not mention her title or act like she expected special treatment. When her chief advisor came looking for her, clearly annoyed that she had wandered off, Lysera seemed disappointed that she had to leave. "Will you be here if I visit again?" she asked Jack as she prepared to go. Jack shrugged. "I'm not planning on going anywhere. This is home." Over the next year, Queen Lysera visited New Haven 7 more times. Always officially, she came for diplomatic reasons, to check on the outer colonies or meet with local administrators. But she always found time to visit Jack's greenhouse. They took long walks through the wheat fields, talking about everything except politics. Jack learned that Lysera loved old poetry and missed having real conversations. Lysera learned that Jack had come to New Haven 5 years ago looking for peace after a difficult time in his life. Jack never talked about his past in detail, and Lysera respected that. She was surrounded by people who wanted things from her, who saw her crown before they saw her. Jack treated her like anyone else. He disagreed with her opinions sometimes. He made her laugh with his dry sense of humor. He taught her how to properly prune tomato plants and never once asked her for a favor. On her 8th visit, they sat on the porch of Jack's small cottage watching the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink and the fields glowed in the fading light. Lysera had been unusually quiet all day. "I need to tell you something," she said finally. "I'm falling in love with you." Jack looked at her surprised. "I'm nobody. Just a guy who grows vegetables on a colony world. You're a queen. You could have anyone." That's exactly the problem, Lysara said softly. Everyone else wants the queen. You see me, just me. That's rarer than you think. Jack was quiet for a long moment. I'm not the man you think I am. I have things in my past. Dark things. I came here to get away from all that. I don't need to know everything about your past, Lysara replied. I know who you are now. That's enough. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony that scandalized the entire Viridian court. The Queen of Viridia marrying a human gardener from a colony world? It was unthinkable. But Lysara did not care what her court thought. For the first time in her life, she had found something real. Jack moved into the palace but insisted on creating gardens on the grounds. He refused most royal duties and stayed out of political meetings. The court whispered about him, called him simple, wondered what the queen saw in this quiet human who preferred dirt under his fingernails to diplomatic functions. Jack did not care. He had found peace again, this time with someone he loved. For 3 years they lived in quiet happiness. Lysara ruled her empire with Jack's steady support behind the scenes. He offered advice when she asked, listened when she needed to talk, and never tried to control or manipulate her. The court grew accustomed to the strange human prince consort who spent his days in the gardens. Jack seemed perfectly content with his simple life. He read poetry, cooked elaborate meals from old earth recipes, and cultivated roses that bloomed in impossible colors. No one suspected that he had once been something very different. The gentle gardener kept his secrets buried deep, hoping they would stay that way forever. But the universe had other plans. The alarms woke Jack before dawn. Not the gentle palace chimes that usually signaled morning, but harsh warning sirens that meant danger. He sat up in bed immediately, his body responding with trained reflexes that Lysara had never seen before. She was already pulling on her robes, her face pale with worry. What's happening? Jack asked, but he already knew. Those were military alert sirens. Within minutes, they were in the palace command center. General Torrin stood before a massive holographic display showing the star systems of the Viridian Empire. At the edge of the display, colored in threatening red, was a fleet of ships. A very large fleet. They appeared on our long-range sensors 3 hours ago. General Torrin explained to the rapidly assembling War Council. We've identified them as Krell Dominion warships. 240 vessels, including heavy battle cruisers. They're heading directly for our territory. Jack stood quietly in his usual corner, but his eyes were locked on the display. He was counting ships, analyzing their formation, calculating distances and travel times. His mind, dormant for years, was suddenly working again in ways he had tried to forget. The display flickered and showed a new image. A massive alien filled the screen, his red skin marked with battle scars. His armor was black and decorated with symbols of conquest. When he spoke, his voice was like grinding rocks. I am High Commander Draxus of the Krell Dominion. Your empire sits on territory that should belong to the strong, not the weak. You have 10 days to surrender your systems to Krell control. If you refuse, we will take them by force. There is no negotiation. There is no mercy. Choose wisely. The transmission ended. The War Council erupted in panicked discussion. Some advisors argued for immediate diplomacy, suggesting they offer tribute to avoid war. Others wanted to evacuate key systems and prepare for guerrilla resistance. General Torrin looked grim as he outlined their military options, and none of them sounded good. Our fleet numbers 130 warships, the general explained. We're outgunned almost 2 to 1. The Krell have been fighting continuous wars for decades. Their crews are battle-hardened veterans. Ours are well-trained but have no real combat experience. We've been at peace for over a century. Admiral Kelrus, the fleet commander, spread his hands helplessly. The Krell use weapons we've never encountered in actual combat. They specialize in aggressive fleet tactics that overwhelm defensive positions. Every simulation we run shows the same result. We lose. Jack listened to it all, his expression unreadable. He watched the tactical displays showing Krell fleet movements from their previous conquests. He studied their ship formations, their attack patterns, their victory records. A part of his mind he had locked away was analyzing everything, finding patterns, seeing weaknesses. He forced himself to stay quiet. Lysara argued with her council for hours, but no good options appeared. Surrender meant slavery for her people. Fighting meant probable destruction. Evacuation meant abandoning everything her ancestors had built. When the meeting finally ended with nothing decided, she looked exhausted and defeated. Jack followed her back to their private chambers. Lysara stood at the window staring out at the peaceful city below. Lights twinkled in the darkness, millions of people going about their lives unaware that everything might end in 10 days. "I'm going to fail them," she whispered. "My people trusted me to protect them, and I have no idea how. The Krell are going to destroy everything, and I can't stop them." Jack stood behind her, wrestling with himself. He had sworn he would never go back to that life. Never use those skills again. Never become that person. But he could not watch Lysara's empire burn without trying to help. He could not let millions die when he might be able to prevent it. "Lysara," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She turned to look at him, confused by the strange tone in his voice. "Before I came to New Haven, I wasn't just a nobody running from a difficult past. I was someone very specific. Someone whose skills might help right now." Jack paused, choosing his words carefully. "If you give me access to your military command network, I can analyze the Krell fleet more thoroughly. I might be able to find options your generals are missing." Lysara stared at him. "Jack, you're a gardener. What do you know about military strategy?" "More than I wish I did," Jack replied. His voice was harder now, colder. "I spent 30 years learning how to fight wars. I was good at it, very good. That's what I was running from when I came to New Haven." For the first time since they met, Lysara saw something frightening in her husband's eyes, a sharpness, a calculating intelligence that had always been there but hidden beneath layers of gentleness. "Who are you?" she asked. "Someone who tried very hard to stop being who he was," Jack said. "But if you want to save your empire, you need that person back. At least temporarily. Trust me, please. Let me try to help." Lysara studied his face for a long moment. Everything she thought she knew about Jack was being challenged. But she had always trusted her instincts about people, and those instincts said that Jack was sincere. Whatever his past was, he wanted to help. "All right," she said finally. "I'll authorize your access to the military network. Show me what you can do." Jack nodded once, then turned and walked to the communications terminal in their chambers. He entered commands with the confidence of someone who had used military systems before. Within seconds, he had pulled up detailed intelligence files on the Krell fleet. Lysara watched over his shoulder as Jack absorbed information at an incredible speed. Ship classifications, weapon systems, historical battle records, supply line data, fleet composition analysis. He processed it all in hours, his eyes moving rapidly across screens filled with tactical data. He made notes, drew diagrams, built models of fleet movements. As dawn broke, Jack finally leaned back from the terminal. He looked tired, but there was something different about him now. The gentle gardener was gone. In his place was someone focused and dangerous. "I need to meet with General Torrin and the Admiralty," Jack said. "Right now. And I need you to trust me even if what I say sounds crazy." Lysara sent for the military commanders immediately. When they arrived, clearly annoyed at being summoned by the Queen's gardener husband, Jack was standing in front of a tactical display he had prepared. He looked at each of them with an expression they had never seen before. "Command." "Gentlemen," Jack said, his voice carrying authority that made them unconsciously straighten. "We're going to talk about how to beat the Krell, and you're going to want to sit down, because everything you think you know about warfare is about to change." General Torrin started to object, but something in Jack's bearing made him pause. This was not the quiet gardener who usually sat silently in council meetings. This was someone else entirely. "Who are you, really?" the general asked. Jack's smile was cold and humorless. "Pull up the classified human military database. Search for Commander Jack Hayes, Earth Defense Forces. Authorization code Reaper. 773. Admiral Kelris entered the search, then went very pale as the results appeared on screen. The heavily redacted file showed a combat record that seemed impossible for one person. Dozens of major engagements. Impossible victories. A reputation that made even hardened officers nervous. Jack looked at each stunned face. "Now that we've established my credentials, let's discuss how we're going to make the Krell regret coming here." The silence in the war room was heavy after Admiral Kelris read the search results aloud. Commander Jack Hayes, 32 years of active combat service. Veteran of the Proxima Colony Defense, the Arcturus Siege, the Kepler Station Assault. Tactical genius behind 17 major victories during humanity's expansion into hostile space. Recipient of Earth's highest military honors. Combat callsign the Reaper. General Torrin stared at Jack with new eyes. "The Reaper. We studied your tactics at the military academy. The Battle of Wolf 359, the Centauri Gambit. Those were considered theoretical exercises, lessons in unconventional warfare. You actually commanded those operations? Jack nodded slowly. I did, and about 50 others that aren't in your academy textbooks because they were too brutal to be teaching examples. Lysera felt like the floor was falling away beneath her. Her gentle husband, who grew tomatoes and read poetry, had once been one of humanity's most feared military commanders. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jack turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes was real. Because I was trying to stop being that person. Trying to forget the things I did, the people I killed, the decisions I made. I came to New Haven to grow things instead of destroying them. I wanted to be Jack the gardener, not Commander Hayes the killer. He looked back at the military officers. But now your empire is facing destruction, and I can't just stand by and watch. So I'll become the Reaper one more time if that's what it takes to save your people. Admiral Kelris recovered from his shock first. Can you really beat the Krell? They outnumber us 2-1. Numbers don't mean everything, Jack replied. He activated the tactical display, showing the Krell fleet positions. The Krell fight a certain way because it's worked for them. Aggressive, overwhelming force applied at key points. They're good at it, but they're also predictable if you know what to look for. He manipulated the display, highlighting patterns in Krell movements. See here and here? They follow standard battle doctrine almost religiously. That doctrine was developed fighting enemies who tried to match them in conventional warfare. They've never faced human tactics, which are anything but conventional. General Torren leaned forward, interested despite himself. What makes human tactics different? Jack's expression was grim. Humans don't fight fair. We fight to win whatever it costs. The Krell have warrior honor and battle traditions. We have survival instinct and a willingness to do whatever works. Deception, ambush, psychological warfare, targeting supply lines instead of fighting glorious battles. The Krell think war is about honor. Humans know war is about breaking your enemy's will to fight. He pulled up tactical simulations. The Viridian military fights the way civilized people fight. You try to minimize casualties, fight honorably, give the enemy chances to surrender. That's admirable, but it won't work against the Krell. You need to fight the way humans did during the expansion wars. Dirty, brutal, and effective. Admiral Kelris looked uncomfortable. You're talking about tactics that violate every principle of civilized warfare. Yes, Jack agreed bluntly. And that's why you'll win. The Krell won't expect it. They've studied your tactics and know how to counter them, but they have no defense against strategies they've never encountered. He looked around the room at the assembled officers. Here's the truth. If you fight the Krell your way, you'll lose. You don't have the numbers or experience to win a conventional war against them. But if you fight my way using human tactics, you have a chance. Maybe a good chance. But you need to be willing to do things that will make you uncomfortable. Lysara found her voice. What kind of things? Jack started listing them, his voice emotionless as he described the strategies he had in mind. Feint retreats to draw enemies into traps, targeting supply ships and support vessels instead of engaging warships directly, using civilian ships as decoys or weapons, attacking at unexpected times to keep the enemy exhausted, sacrificing smaller units to create openings for larger strikes. The more he talked, the more alien he seemed. This was not her husband speaking. This was a military commander who had learned to think in terms of acceptable losses and strategic sacrifices. Every tactic he described was designed to maximize enemy casualties while preserving Viridian strength, regardless of honor or fighting traditions. General Torren looked troubled. Some of what you're suggesting borders on war crimes by Viridian law. Then change your laws, Jack said coldly, or lose your empire. Your choice. The Krell aren't going to follow civilized rules, and neither should you. Admiral Kelris stood and paced the room. Even if we agreed to this, how do we know it would work? You're asking us to completely abandon our military doctrine based on your word. Jack pulled up a new file on the display. These are tactical analyses of every major Krell victory in the past 20 years. I've identified weaknesses in their approach that your analysts missed. The Krell have never lost to an enemy using asymmetric warfare because none of their enemies have been willing to fight that way. But I have. I've used these exact tactics against enemies similar to the Krell, and I won. He showed them detailed breakdowns of theoretical engagements, demonstrating how unconventional tactics could neutralize the Krell's numerical advantage. His analysis was brilliant and thorough. Even Admiral Kelris had to admit the strategies made sense, however uncomfortable they were. General Torren finally spoke. If we do this, if we give you command authority, what exactly are you proposing? Jack outlined his plan in broad strokes. Reorganize the fleet into smaller, more flexible units. Recall old ships from scrapyards to create unpredictability. Train crews on aggressive tactics they had never used. Prepare ambushes and traps throughout Viridian space. Use deception and misdirection to make the fleet seem larger than it was. Most importantly, make the Krell fight on Viridian terms, not their own. It will take every ship, every resource, every person willing to fight, Jack concluded, and it will cost lives. I won't lie about that, but it's your best chance, probably your only chance. The room fell silent as the Viridian officers absorbed this. They were being asked to trust their entire military to a human gardener who had appeared out of nowhere with a secret military past. It seemed insane, but the alternative was certain defeat. Lysara stood and faced her military commanders. I'm authorizing Commander Hayes to assume tactical command of our defense forces. General Torin and Admiral Kelris will maintain operational authority, but strategic planning will be Jack's responsibility. Anyone who can't accept that can resign now. No one resigned, though several officers looked unhappy. They had seen the casualty projections for a conventional fight with the Krell. At least this strange human offered hope, however slim. We have 8 days left, Jack said. That's not much time to prepare, but it will have to be enough. I need immediate access to all fleet assets, complete tactical authority, and no arguments about my methods. If someone questions an order, they're relieved. We don't have time for debate. General Torin nodded slowly. You'll have what you need, Commander. Though I suspect we're all going to regret this. Jack's smile was humorless. You probably will. But you'll be alive to regret it, which is better than the alternative. As the meeting broke up and officers hurried away to begin implementing Jack's orders, Lysara pulled him aside. She looked at this stranger wearing her husband's face and tried to see the man she had married beneath the cold military commander. Can you really do this? She asked. Save us? Jack was quiet for a moment. I can give you a fighting chance. Whether that's enough depends on how well your people can learn to fight like humans, and how much you're willing to become like me temporarily. What do you mean? I mean, Jack said softly, that by the time this is over, you're going to know exactly who I used to be. You're going to see me do terrible things for good reasons, and you might not be able to love me anymore after that. But I'm willing to risk that to save your empire. Lysara took his hand. Then we'll risk it together. Do what you need to do. We'll figure out the rest later. Jack squeezed her hand once, then let go and walked toward the command center. As Lysara watched him leave, she realized she was about to discover who her husband really was beneath the peaceful exterior. Part of her was terrified of what she might find. Jack's first act as tactical commander shocked everyone. He ordered the entire Viridian defense fleet to be reorganized within 24 hours. Traditional battle groups that had existed for decades were broken apart. Ships were reassigned into smaller units that Admiral Kelris called wolf packs, designed for hit and run attacks rather than the formal fleet engagements the Viridian Navy had always practiced, senior captains protested. They had trained for years in standard formation tactics. Jack's response was blunt and public. The Krell know how to fight your standard formations. They've been planning for them. If you give them the battle they expect, you'll lose. Adapt or step aside. 3 captains resigned rather than follow orders from a human outsider. Jack replaced them with younger officers without hesitation. Next, he sent work crews to the orbital scrapyards where old warships sat abandoned. Viridian military doctrine had declared these vessels obsolete 20 years ago, too slow and poorly armed for modern warfare. Jack saw them differently. The Krell have detailed intelligence on your current fleet, he explained to a skeptical Admiral Kelris. They know your ship's capabilities, their weapons ranges, their tactical profiles. These old ships are wild cards. The Krell won't have good data on them, and uncertainty is a weapon. Admiral Kelris watched crews begin reactivating ancient cruisers and destroyers. Those ships are death traps. They can barely maintain shields against modern weapons. They don't need to survive long, Jack replied coldly. They just need to create confusion and draw fire away from your better ships. Every Krell weapon shooting at an old hulk isn't shooting at something important. The Admiral's face went pale as he understood what Jack was really saying. Those old ships and their volunteer crews were being prepared as sacrifices, decoys to buy tactical advantages measured in seconds. It was a brutal calculation that made perfect military sense and violated everything Admiral Kelris believed about honorable warfare. Jack's training program was equally ruthless. He pulled crews off regular duty rotations and drilled them constantly on tactics they had never practiced. False retreats that required perfect timing, coordinated strikes from multiple directions, using asteroids and debris fields for cover instead of fighting in open space, targeting enemy supply ships and communication relays instead of seeking glorious ship-to-ship combat. The training was exhausting and confusing. Viridian captains were used to clear battle lines and honorable engagement rules. Jack taught them to ambush, to feint, to attack where the enemy was weakest rather than where they were strongest. He taught them to think like predators, not soldiers. War isn't about honor, Jack told a group of protesting officers. It's about making the other side quit. You don't do that by being fair. You do it by being unpredictable, by attacking where they can't defend, by making them afraid and confused and desperate. The side that's willing to fight dirtiest usually wins. He especially horrified the officer corps by conscripting civilian vessels. Cargo haulers, mining ships, even passenger transports were drafted into service. Jack had them retrofitted with basic weapons and, more importantly, with electronic warfare equipment that could jam Krell communications and sensors. When a transport captain protested that his ship was full of families trying to evacuate, Jack's response was harsh. If the Krell win, there won't be anywhere safe to evacuate to. Everyone fights or everyone dies. Your choice is to fight now with a chance of winning, or wait for the Krell to hunt you down later. The captain reluctantly agreed, and his family helped install the jamming equipment. Lysara watched her husband work 18-hour days, transforming the Viridian military into something she barely recognized. The gentleman who had tended gardens now issued orders that would lead people to their deaths. He calculated acceptable casualty rates the way he used to calculate fertilizer ratios. Every decision was cold and precise. Late one night, she found him alone in the command center, staring at tactical displays showing fleet dispositions. He looked exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. "You should rest," Lysara said softly. Jack shook his head without looking away from the screens. "The Krell will be here in 4 days. I still have too much to do." She moved closer and saw what he was studying. Casualty projections. Different scenarios showing how many Viridian ships and crew would likely die under various tactical plans. Jack was comparing them, looking for the approach that would minimize deaths while still achieving victory. "How do you live with this?" Lysara asked. "Knowing that your decisions will kill people?" Jack was quiet for a long moment. "You tell yourself it's necessary, that more people would die if you did nothing. You calculate whether 10 deaths now prevents 100 deaths later. You become good at the mathematics of tragedy." He finally looked at her and his eyes were haunted. "And then when the war is over, you try to forget the numbers. Sometimes you succeed. Mostly you don't." Lysara wanted to comfort him but did not know how. This version of Jack was a stranger to her, someone carrying burdens she could not fully understand. "Is this who you were during all those battles in your past?" "This is who I had to become to survive them," Jack replied. The young officer who first enlisted thought war would be glorious. He learned fast that war is just math with blood. The best commanders are the ones who can make the calculations without flinching. I was very good at not flinching. He turned back to the displays. "I should warn you, when the fighting starts, I'll be worse than this, colder, more distant. In combat, you can't afford emotions or second guessing. You make decisions in seconds that cost lives, and you can't let yourself feel anything about it until later. If you feel things during the battle, you hesitate, and hesitation kills more people." "I'm frightened of who you're becoming," Lysara admitted. "Or maybe I'm frightened of who you always were underneath." Jack nodded. "You should be. The Reaper isn't a nice person. He's effective, but he's not someone you'd want to be married to. That's why I tried to bury him under layers of gardening and poetry. I was hoping he'd stay buried. Will you be able to put him away again after this is over?" Lysara asked. "I don't know," Jack said honestly. "Last time it took me years of therapy and finding a quiet place where no one knew my name. This time might be harder because you'll know what I'm capable of. Hard to pretend to be harmless when your wife has seen you calculate how many people need to die to win a battle." Lysara stood beside him, looking at the terrible calculations on his screens. Despite her fear and confusion, she understood one thing clearly. Jack was doing this for her. He had found peace and was willingly destroying it to save her empire. Whatever he had to become to win this war, he was doing it out of love for her. "We'll find our way back to the garden together," she promised. After this is over, however it ends, we'll remember who we really are. Jack gave her a sad smile. I hope you're right. But first we have to survive. Over the next 3 days, Jack drove the Viridian forces relentlessly. He positioned his wolf packs throughout the star system in locations the Krell would not expect. He laid traps and prepared ambush points. He distributed the old decommissioned ships in patterns that would create maximum confusion. He briefed every captain personally on their role in his overall strategy. The plan he had created was audacious and risky. It required perfect timing across dozens of separate units, with no room for error or hesitation. Any part that failed could cause the entire strategy to collapse. General Torrin studied the battle plan and called it brilliant but insane. It's the kind of plan only a human would attempt, the general said, mixing admiration with horror. You're gambling everything on chaos and confusion. The Krell are stronger than us in direct combat, Jack replied. So we don't fight directly. We create situations where their strength doesn't matter. We make them react to us instead of executing their own plan. We turn their advantages into weaknesses. On the final day before the Krell arrived, Jack gathered all the ship captains for one last briefing. He looked at their faces, these Viridian officers who had been forced to learn human warfare in a matter of days. They looked frightened but determined. Some of you won't survive tomorrow, Jack told them bluntly. I won't lie about that. This plan requires sacrifices. But if you follow orders exactly, if you trust the strategy even when it doesn't make sense, we can win this. The Krell think they're about to conquer a weak civilized empire. We're going to show them what happens when civilized people learn to fight like humans. Are you ready? The captains responded with a unified affirmation. They were not ready, not really. How could anyone be ready for what Jack was asking them to do? But they would try because they had no other choice. Jack dismissed them and stood alone in the command center. Tomorrow the Krell would arrive and he would have to become the Reaper completely. No more gentleness, no more mercy, no more Gardener. Just cold tactical calculations and ruthless execution. He thought about his greenhouse back on New Haven, about the simple peace he had found there before Lysara walked into his life. That life seemed impossibly distant now, like it had happened to someone else. Maybe it had. Tomorrow he would find out if he could still be the commander he once was, and whether winning was worth what it would cost him to become that person again. The Krell fleet emerged from hyperspace at exactly the predicted time and location. High Commander Draxus stood on the bridge of his flagship, looking at the tactical displays with satisfaction. 240 warships under his command, arranged in the classic Krell battle formation that had conquered a dozen star systems. Before him, the Viridian homeworld hung in space like a ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. His sensors showed the Viridian defense fleet arrayed in orbit around their capital planet. Standard defensive formation, exactly as his intelligence had predicted. About 130 ships positioned to protect the planetary shields. They were outnumbered and outgunned. This would be another easy victory to add to his record. Draxus transmitted one final message to the Viridians. This is your last chance to surrender. Yield now and your people will be allowed to live as subjects of the Krell Dominion. Resist and we will destroy your fleet and bombard your cities until nothing remains. You have 1 hour to decide. In the palace command center, Jack listened to the transmission without expression. Around him, General Torrin and the military staff waited tensely for his response. Admiral Kelris stood ready to relay orders to the fleet. Lysara watched from the observation deck, her hands gripping the railing. Jack checked the chronometer, then opened a command channel. All units, this is Reaper Actual. The Krell have arrived exactly where we wanted them. Stand by for my signal. Remember your training. Trust the plan. Do not engage until ordered. His voice was completely calm, showing no hint of the enormous pressure of the moment. The hour passed slowly. Draxus grew impatient as no surrender came. Finally, he ordered his fleet to advance. The Krell warships moved forward in their intimidating attack formation, weapons charging, confident in their superior numbers and firepower. Jack watched the Krell fleet on his displays, tracking their exact positions and velocities. He was waiting for a specific moment, when the Krell were fully committed to their approach vector with too much momentum to quickly change course. His fingers hovered over the command console. The Krell are predators, Jack said quietly to General Torrin beside him, and predators are dangerous, but they're also predictable. They always go for what looks like easy prey. As the Krell fleet crossed an invisible line in space, Jack's expression changed. The gentle gardener disappeared completely. In his place was the Reaper, cold and precise. All units execute Protocol 1 now. The effect was immediate and devastating. Half the Viridian fleet that Draxus was looking at simply vanished. The ships flickered and disappeared like soap bubbles popping. They had never been there at all. Just sophisticated holographic projections, designed to make the defenders seem larger and more concentrated than they were. Draxus had a moment of confused surprise before his sensors detected the real Viridian ships, powering up from hiding positions scattered throughout the system. Behind asteroid clusters in the shadow of moons powered down among orbital debris, the wolf packs emerged and attacked from every direction at once. All units, weapons free, Jack ordered. Hit them hard and fast. Don't give them time to organize. The Viridian ships struck like wolves attacking a herd of prey. They did not engage in orderly fleet combat. Instead, they swarmed the Krell formation from multiple angles, firing and then breaking away before the heavier Krell ships could return effective fire. The Krell had been expecting a defensive stand. They got chaos. Admiral Kelrus watched his displays in amazement. They're breaking formation. The Krell are confused. Good, Jack replied. Confusion is the point. They trained to fight a certain kind of battle. We're giving them something completely different. Send in the second wave. The conscripted civilian ships, dismissed by the Krell as panicking evacuees trying to flee the system, suddenly reversed course and dove into the battle. They were not trying to fight the Krell warships directly. Instead, they activated the electronic warfare equipment Jack had installed, flooding Krell communications with interference and jamming their targeting sensors. Krell ships began firing on each other in the confusion, their automated weapon systems unable to distinguish friend from enemy through the electronic chaos. Draxus screamed orders trying to restore coordination, but his communications were filled with static and overlapping transmissions. Phase 2, Jack announced. Deploy the old ships. The decommissioned Viridian warships, ancient vessels that should have been scrap metal, suddenly appeared on Krell sensors. They accelerated toward the Krell formation at maximum speed, their volunteer crews knowing this was likely a one-way mission. The Krell had to make a split-second decision: ignore these unknown ships or divert weapons to destroy them. Draxus made the wrong choice. Uncertain what these strange vessels were capable of, he ordered a significant portion of his fleet to engage them. Krell heavy cruisers turned their weapons on the old ships, blasting them apart with overwhelming firepower, which meant those weapons were not firing at the real threat. Jack's wolf packs used the distraction to close distance on the Krell fleet's vulnerable rear elements. The attack was surgical and brutal. Supply ships exploded. Communication vessels were crippled. Support craft that the Krell needed for sustained operations were systematically destroyed. They're trying to withdraw, Admiral Kelrus reported. The Krell are pulling back to regroup. Jack studied the tactical display, watching the Krell fleet's retreat pattern. No, don't let them. Alpha and Beta groups pursue and harass. Don't let them rest or organize. I want them exhausted and confused. What followed was unlike any battle in Viridian military history. Instead of the formal engagement the Krell expected, Jack turned it into a running fight that lasted hours. Every time the Krell tried to establish a defensive position, Viridian ships appeared from unexpected directions and attacked before withdrawing. The Krell could not pin down their enemy for a decisive engagement. Jack rotated his forces constantly, pulling back tired crews and sending in fresh ones. He kept the Krell under continuous pressure, never allowing them to rest or regroup properly. It was exhausting for both sides, but the Viridians had prepared for this while the Krell had not. As the battle stretched into its 6th hour, Draxus finally managed to establish a defensive formation and get his fleet under control. He had lost 30 ships, far more than he expected, but he still had numerical superiority. He prepared to launch a massive counterattack. Jack had been waiting for this moment. Now comes the real trap, he said quietly. All units execute Protocol 3. Pull back in apparent disorder. The Viridian fleet broke contact and retreated toward the planet in what appeared to be a panicked rout. Ships fled in different directions, seemingly without coordination. Several broadcast false distress signals. To Draxus, it looked like the defenders were finally breaking under pressure. He made his second mistake. He ordered his entire fleet to pursue aggressively, seeing a chance to finish the battle in one overwhelming assault. The Krell fleet surged forward, weapons blazing, confident that victory was finally within reach. They sailed directly into the largest minefield ever. Deployed in Viridian space, Jack had spent 3 days positioning thousands of mines throughout the space around Viridia Prime, using trajectories and placements that would be invisible to long-range sensors but deadly once activated. He had predicted exactly where the Krell would be when they committed to their final attack. His prediction was perfect. "Activate the mines," Jack ordered. The space around the Krell fleet erupted in explosions. Ships that moments ago had been confidently advancing suddenly found themselves surrounded by detonating mines. Shields overloaded, hulls ruptured. The carefully ordered Krell formation dissolved into chaos and death. Draxus watched in horror as his vanguard was shredded, dozens of ships destroyed or crippled in seconds. He screamed orders to retreat, but his fleet's momentum carried them deeper into the kill zone. Every direction they turned, more mines waited. "Now finish it," Jack said coldly. "All units full assault. No mercy." The Viridian fleet reversed its retreat and attacked from all sides simultaneously. The decommissioned space stations that the Krell had dismissed as abandoned infrastructure suddenly powered up, revealing themselves as hidden weapon platforms loaded with every heavy gun Jack could install. They opened fire at point-blank range into the Krell fleet's flank. The battle became a slaughter. The Krell fleet, trapped in the minefield with enemies on all sides, could not maneuver or coordinate. Ships exploded by the dozen. Those that tried to break out of the trap ran into more mines or were cut down by waiting Viridian wolf packs. Jack coordinated the attack with cold precision, directing ships to target specific enemies, rotating units to maintain constant pressure, exploiting every weakness in the Krell formation. There was no hesitation in his voice, no emotion, just tactical calculations executed with perfect timing. General Torrin watched the destruction with a mixture of awe and horror. "They're breaking. The Krell are surrendering." Indeed, scattered Krell ships were broadcasting surrender signals. Others tried desperate escape attempts only to be caught by Viridian ships that had been positioned exactly where they needed to be. Draxus's flagship itself was crippled, its engines destroyed by a coordinated strike from 3 different wolf packs. The Krell fleet limped away from Viridia Prime like wounded animals. Of the 240 warships that had arrived so confidently, only 132 remained combat-capable. The rest were destroyed or so damaged they had to be towed. Draxus's surrender transmission was broadcast throughout the galaxy, a humiliation the proud Krell had not suffered in over a century. In the Palace Command Center, the Viridian military staff erupted in celebration. Officers embraced, cheered, some wept with relief. General Torrin clasped Admiral Kelrus on the shoulder, both men grinning with exhausted joy. They had won. Against impossible odds, they had actually won. But Jack did not celebrate. He stood before the tactical displays, reviewing battle reports with the same cold expression he had maintained throughout the engagement. His fingers moved across screens, analyzing casualty figures, damage assessments, enemy retreat vectors. The Reaper did not put away his weapons just because one battle was over. Lysera watched him from the observation deck, seeing the vast distance between her husband and the celebrating officers. While everyone else embraced victory, Jack was calculating the cost. She made her way down to the command floor and touched his arm gently. "Jack, it's over. We won." He glanced at her briefly. "The battle is over. The war isn't. The Krell won't honor that surrender treaty unless we make sure they're too afraid to break it. Right now, Draxus is retreating to lick his wounds and plan revenge. We need to change how he thinks about Viridia." General Torrin approached, still smiling. "Commander Hayes, that was the most brilliant tactical display I've ever witnessed. You predicted their every move." "They made it easy by being predictable," Jack replied flatly. He pulled up a new display showing the Krell fleet's retreat path. "They're heading to this system here probably to establish a temporary base and repair their damaged ships. It's a logical choice far enough from our territory to feel safe." Admiral Kelrus frowned. "So we let them go and rebuild?" "No," Jack said. "We teach them that nowhere is safe. That attacking Viridia was the worst mistake of their lives. We make sure every Krell warrior remembers what happened here and tells stories to frighten their children." The celebration in the room died as officers realized what Jack was suggesting. General Torrin's smile faded. "You want to pursue them? Our fleet is exhausted. We've taken significant damage ourselves." Jack brought up ship status reports. We have 68 ships still fully combat capable. The Krell have more ships, but most are damaged and their crews are demoralized. Their guard will be down because they think the civilized Viridians will accept their surrender and let them leave peacefully. Because that's what civilized people do, Lysara said quietly. Jack looked at her directly. Yes, and that's why the Krell will attack again in 5 or 10 years once they've rebuilt. They'll tell themselves it was bad luck, a clever trick that won't work twice, unless we make them truly afraid. Unless we show them that humans don't fight by civilized rules. He activated a tactical plan on the main display. We take our best ships, the ones with fresh crews, and we hunt them. Not an honorable pursuit, but raids and ambushes. We attack their supply lines, destroy their repair facilities, cripple stragglers. We make their retreat a nightmare. We show them that surrender doesn't mean safety. It means we're graciously allowing them to run away while we hurt them more. The command center fell silent. Every Viridian officer understood what Jack was describing. It was exactly the kind of ruthless, uncivilized warfare they had been taught to avoid. Attacking retreating enemies who had surrendered violated every principle of honorable combat. Admiral Kelris spoke carefully. Commander, if we do that, we're no better than the Krell. Worse, actually. At least they were honest about their intentions. We accepted their surrender and then attacked them anyway. Jack's expression did not change. You're thinking like a Viridian. Think like prey that just survived a predator. The predator retreated, but it's still hungry and will return when it's strong enough. Do you let it go and hope it forgets about you? Or do you make sure it's too injured to be a threat for a very long time? There has to be another way, Lysara said. We can build better defenses, form alliances, strengthen our military. We don't have to become monsters to stay safe. Jack turned to face her fully. I told you that you wouldn't like who I become during war. This is what the Reaper does. He doesn't just win battles. He makes sure enemies never want to fight again. It's brutal and ruthless and effective. It's also why I spent 10 years trying to forget I was ever this person. He looked around at the assembled officers. Here's the reality. If you let the Krell retreat peacefully, they will rebuild and attack again. Maybe not you. Maybe your children or grandchildren. The Krell culture respects strength and despises weakness. Right now, you've shown strength. If you let them leave without consequences, they'll see it as weakness disguised as mercy. They'll return. General Torrens struggled with the logic. Everything Jack said made sense from a purely military standpoint, but it violated everything Viridian society valued. What exactly are you proposing? Jack outlined his plan. A pursuit force of the fastest, least damaged ships would follow the Krell retreat at a distance. Over the next several days, they would attack opportunistically. A disabled Krell ship falling behind the main fleet would be destroyed. Supply convoys trying to reach the retreating fleet would be intercepted. Repair stations the Krell tried to establish would be sabotaged. Nothing that could be called a major battle. Just constant harassment that would exhaust the already defeated enemy. The goal isn't to destroy their entire fleet, Jack explained. It's psychological warfare. We want every Krell survivor to spend the rest of their lives remembering how terrifying it was to retreat from Viridia. We want them to tell stories about the Viridian humans who hunted them across space. We want the next Krell commander who considers attacking Viridia to hesitate because he remembers what happened to Draxus. Admiral Kelris looked troubled. And how many of our people will die in these raids? Jack pulled up casualty projections. Probably 50 to 100. Maybe more if we're unlucky. But if it prevents the next war, it saves thousands later. Again, it's the mathematics of tragedy. Small costs now to prevent large costs later. Lysara felt sick. This was the man she had married. Calculating acceptable deaths with the same precision he used to calculate fertilizer ratios for his gardens. She understood his logic but hated that it made sense. I can't authorize this, she said finally. I won't send our people to attack an enemy that has already surrendered. It's wrong, Jack. You know it's wrong. Jack nodded slowly. Yes, it's wrong. It's also necessary. But you're the queen. If you order me to let them go, I'll obey. That's your choice to make. The weight of that choice pressed down on Lysara. Let the Krell retreat and risk future war, or authorize brutal attacks on defeated enemies and compromise everything Viridian civilization stood for. There was no good answer. General Torrens spoke quietly. Perhaps there's a middle path. We could pursue them, but only to monitor their movements. Make it clear we're watching them. That might achieve the psychological effect Commander Hayes wants without the brutality. Jack considered this. It would be less effective, but better than nothing. The Krell would know we're capable of pursuing, but chose not to. That's still a statement of strength. Lysera grabbed onto this compromise gratefully. Then that's what we'll do. Admiral Kelris assigned ships to shadow the Krell retreat. Make sure they know we're there, but no attacks unless they hostile action first. Jack accepted the order without argument, though his expression suggested he thought it was a mistake. Understood. I'll coordinate the pursuit fleet. As the officers dispersed to implement the new orders, Lysera pulled Jack aside again. You're disappointed. I'm relieved, Jack said honestly. You just saved me from doing something I would have regretted for the rest of my life. The Reaper wanted to hunt them down and crush them completely. Jack the gardener is glad you stopped him. Are those really two different people? Lysera asked. Or are you just one person making choices? Jack was quiet for a long moment. I don't know anymore. Right now it feels like the Reaper is still in control and Jack is buried somewhere underneath, screaming at the terrible things I'm thinking about. Maybe in a few days Jack will come back to the surface. Maybe not. What were you like during your other wars? Lysera asked. After the battles ended? Jack's expression grew distant. Cold. Functional. I could plan operations and give orders, but I couldn't feel much of anything. The emotions would come back later, usually at the worst times. Nightmares. Panic attacks, sitting in my quarters staring at casualty reports for hours. That's why I retired. I was starting to break. He looked at her with those haunted eyes. You're seeing me at my most dangerous right now. Perfectly calm, completely rational, able to calculate how many deaths are acceptable without flinching. In a few days, when my mind finally processes what we just did, that's when I'll fall apart. And you'll have to decide if you can live with someone who alternates between being an emotionless tactical computer and a broken mess reliving his war crimes. Lysera took his hands. We'll figure it out together. But right now I need... 3 days after the battle, Jack finally left the command center. He had remained there continuously, monitoring the Krell retreat, analyzing every detail, unable to let go of his tactical mindset. General Torrin had to physically order him to get some rest, insisting that other officers could handle the routine monitoring. Jack returned to the royal chambers in the early morning hours. Lysera was asleep, and he stood in the doorway watching her peaceful face for a long time. She looked so innocent, so untouched by the violence he had orchestrated. He wondered if she would still look at him the same way when she woke up. He moved to the window and stared out at Viridia Prime's capital city. Lights twinkled in the darkness, millions of people safe in their homes because of what he had done. They were celebrating in the streets, declaring a planetary holiday, building monuments to honor the defenders. They saw glory and victory. Jack saw the casualty reports that no one else had read yet. 18,347 dead. He knew the exact number. He had read every name, every service record, every next of kin notification. Captains who had followed his orders into death traps. Crews who had volunteered for the old ships knowing they would not survive. Civilians who had turned their cargo haulers into weapons platforms and died when Krell fire found them. The numbers started to feel real now. During the battle, they had been statistics, acceptable losses calculated against strategic objectives. Now they were people, someone's father, someone's daughter, someone's friend, all dead because he had ordered them into situations where death was the likely outcome. Jack's hands started shaking. He pressed them against the window, trying to stay grounded, but the emotions he had suppressed during the crisis were flooding back. The memories of the battle mixed with memories of older battles. All the other times he had calculated acceptable losses and sent people to die. He remembered the faces of the Viridian captains during his final briefing. Young officers, scared but determined, trusting him to lead them to victory. He had promised them they could win if they followed his orders. He had not mentioned that following his orders would kill a significant percentage of them. That was the part of command no one talked about. Sometimes winning required sacrificing the people who trusted you most. Lysera woke to find Jack still standing at the window, his forehead pressed against the glass. His whole body was rigid, his breathing irregular. She recognized the signs from her own experiences with traumatized soldiers who had served in her military. This was what a breaking mind looked like. Jack, she said softly, approaching carefully. Come sit down. He did not seem to hear her. His voice when he spoke was barely a whisper. I killed them. Not the Krell. Me. I designed the tactics that put them in kill zones. I calculated the acceptable mortality rates. I knew the old ships would be destroyed and sent them anyway. Those people trusted me and I spent their lives like currency to buy victory. Lysara touched his arm gently. You saved the Empire. Those people died protecting their home. They chose to fight. Jack finally looked at her and his eyes were filled with anguish. They didn't choose to die. I chose that for them. That captain who wanted to evacuate his family but I conscripted his ship. His transport was destroyed in the 3rd hour of combat. Wife, 2 children, all dead. Because I needed his ship for electronic warfare. Was that an acceptable cost? He pulled away from her and started pacing. During the battle I felt nothing. I watched ships explode on my screens and just updated my tactical calculations. Commander Hayes, cold and efficient, making sure the math worked out in our favor. Now the battle is over and I can feel again. And all I feel is the weight of those deaths. Lysara did not know what to say. She wanted to comfort him, but she understood that Jack needed to process this in his own way. She had seen warriors after battle before, but Jack's guilt seemed deeper, more personal. He carried not just the grief of losing comrades, but the burden of being the one who sent them to their deaths. Jack stopped pacing and turned to her. You asked me once how I lived with making decisions that kill people. The honest answer is that I don't live with it well. After every battle I do this. I break down. I remember every order I gave, every face I'll never see again, every family that's getting a death notification because of my strategies. He sat down heavily, his hands covering his face. That's why I left the military. Not because I stopped being good at it. Because I couldn't handle the accumulation of guilt anymore. Every battle added more weight until I could barely function. I came to New Haven because I thought if I stopped fighting, maybe the nightmares would stop. Maybe I could forget what it feels like to sacrifice people for strategic objectives. Lysara sat beside him, not touching but present. And did it help? The 10 years of peace? Jack was quiet for a long time. Yes and no. The nightmares got less frequent. I could go whole days without thinking about the people I killed. The gardens helped, growing things instead of destroying them. But the guilt never really left. It just got buried under layers of ordinary life. Now it's all back, fresh and raw, plus 18,000 more names to add to my collection of ghosts. Over the next week, the Viridian Empire celebrated its unlikely victory. Queen Lysara appeared at ceremonies honoring the fallen, gave speeches praising the bravery of her defenders, and accepted congratulations from allied governments throughout the galaxy. She played her role as the triumphant leader perfectly. Jack attended none of it. He remained in their chambers or sometimes in the gardens, visibly struggling. Lysara would find him at odd hours staring at nothing, or reading casualty reports over and over, or standing in front of the memorial wall where names of the fallen were being inscribed. He did not sleep well. When he did sleep, he woke gasping from nightmares. General Torrin visited once, wanting to discuss defensive improvements and long-term military strategy. Jack listened politely but offered little input. The sharp-focused commander who had orchestrated the victory was gone. In his place was a hollowed-out man who flinched at sudden noises and could not maintain eye contact for long. Is he all right? General Torrin asked Lysara privately afterward. Commander Hayes seems different. He's processing what we asked him to do, Lysara replied. Give him time. The Viridian military, meanwhile, was processing its own transformation. The junior officers who had learned human tactics were now heroes, promoted and decorated for their performance in battle. The old guard officers who had resisted Jack's methods were quietly sidelined. The defense fleet was being reorganized along the lines Jack had established, his wolfpack tactics becoming standard doctrine. Admiral Kelrus came to the palace to ask Jack's advice on the reorganization. He found Jack in the gardens, kneeling in dirt, planting flowers with intense focus. The Admiral watched for a moment, then approached carefully. Commander Hayes, I wanted to discuss the new fleet structure with you. Jack did not look up from his planting. I'm not a commander anymore. Just Jack, and I don't want to discuss military matters. But your strategies worked brilliantly. We need your expertise to— My strategies killed 18,000 people. Jack interrupted, his voice flat. Brilliant, maybe. But the cost in blood was real. You don't need me to help you refine methods for killing more efficiently. You have plenty of officers who can do that now. I taught them well. Admiral Kelrus was quiet for a moment. You're angry that we're adopting your tactics. Jack finally looked up and his expression was pained. No, I'm horrified that I showed you how. The Viridian military was civilized before I came along. You fought with honor and restraint. I taught you to fight like humans, dirty and ruthless. You won, but you lost something too. Your innocence, maybe. The belief that war can be civilized. I took that from you. You saved us, Admiral Kelris said firmly. We would have lost everything if you hadn't helped. I know, Jack replied. And that's what makes it so terrible. You needed someone willing to be ruthless, and I was that person. But that doesn't mean I'm proud of it. It just means I was the monster you required to defeat other monsters. The Admiral left, troubled by the conversation. He had expected to find the cold, brilliant tactician who had orchestrated their victory. Instead, he found a broken man planting flowers and mourning the consequences of his own effectiveness. Lysara spent more time with Jack as the days passed, just being present. She did not try to fix him or tell him his guilt was misplaced. She understood that he needed to work through this in his own time, his own way. She would find him in the gardens at dawn, already working. She would sit nearby and read, or sometimes help with the planting, and they would not talk much, but her presence seemed to help. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after the battle, they sat together watching the sunset. Jack had not had a nightmare the previous night, the first time in weeks. He seemed a little more present, a little less lost in his own guilt. I've been thinking about something you said. Lysara spoke quietly, about being a monster that we needed. I don't think that's right. Jack looked at her questioningly. Monsters don't feel guilty about what they do, Lysara continued. They don't break down after battles or spend weeks reading casualty reports. They don't plant memorial gardens or refuse to celebrate their victories.